Hey everyone, the Skull Seeker here. It is time for part 4 of our total collection video. So today I'm going to be showing off all of my reptiles, amphibians, and birds. And so we'll get started right off with the reptiles, starting with the snakes. So our first snake skull we're going to look at is the Western Diamondback Rattlesnake. And so you can see here, I might want to do it 2 times. There we go. So we obviously have the big fangs, key characteristic of venomous snakes and vipers like the Western Diamondback Rattlesnake. You can see these smaller teeth here, and then the teeth on the roof of the mouth. The eye is right there. That big hole. You can see both the eyes would be there on the sides. The nose is all this area in the front. So it has all sorts of intricate bones there. And then, of course, the heat sensing pits are in here as well. So overall, pretty cool. If we look at the front view, you'll notice that we have these kind of, like where the fangs are coming out, they are not even. There's actually 2 holes here, 2 holes here, and if you look at it closely, you'll see that the fang on the left side of the screen is on the left side of the, it's kind of hard to explain. Anyway, there's essentially 2 fangs that come out here. This one is the one that's on the left, and this one is the one that's also on the left. So essentially, it's missing both of the right fangs on here, but all vipers can have 2 fangs on each side, potentially even 3 fangs on each side. They all have a mechanism here where they can have up to 4 fangs in the front at once of full-size fangs. Then the smaller fangs, called reserve fangs, will be in this area, and of course these will like fold out when it bites something. When it opens its mouth, they fold out, that way they can bite, because otherwise they're so long that when the mouth is closed, it would penetrate through their bottom jaw. So that is an interesting feature of the vipers, is that their fangs fold up when their mouth is closed. Now, some snakes, like the inland taipan, will have fangs so long that it grows through their bottom jaw. So, you look at them upside down, they'll have a hole in their jaw where their tooth is coming out because their fang grew so long. But anyway, not these guys. Because, yeah, these ones fold up. Anyway, these things... rattlesnakes tend to feed on rodents and stuff like that. So these things are going to be going into burrows of rodents and killing them with its venom and then swallowing them whole. They kind of have an ability, since they can rotate their fangs, they can kind of like work their prey into their throat, which is super cool. They just kind of like rotate their fangs back and forth, and it's called like walking their prey into their throat or something like that. It's really interesting to watch, but really creepy at the same time. They can also move the bottom jaw independently, since, as you've noticed, it's not fused in the front like other animals. And that's so that they can spread it out to the sides and eat prey that is much larger than their head. So that's how they do it, is because their jaw doesn't actually unhinge. It's just not fused in the front, so they can just stretch the skin to the sides and then eat things much larger than their head. So yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, and then the Jacobson's organ would be on the roof of the mouth there. Now, if we want to compare something to this, we'll go to, well, I guess we'll do that in a bit. We'll compare in a bit. So there's our Western Diamondback. Next, we have a very similar looking skull, another North American species of venomous viper. And so this is a Copperhead, and so it has some of the vertebrae there coming out of the back. Anyway, you'll see its fangs are more pointed, I guess, to the back. Once again, it would be able to rotate these forward. This one just hasn't preserved like that. You can see the additional teeth on the lower jaw and on the roof of the mouth. the nose from the front, and then the eyes. Then on this guy, let's see, this is the best way to notice it. You'll notice there are some additional fangs, kind of hard to see here, but there are multiple fangs right above the one that curves out here that it would bite with. And these stored fangs here are called reserve fangs. Those are the ones that will grow into place as it loses its big fangs in the front. So essentially one of those small fangs is going to eventually become one of the bigger ones, assuming the snake lived longer. Anyway, there's our top view, our underside view. But yeah, that is our Copperhead. These guys are famously distinguishable because of their Hershey's Kiss patterns, and essentially that is darker bands that are shaped like Hershey's Kisses, whereas the rest of the body is lighter. And on water snakes, which they can be sometimes confused for, the water snakes have darker bands on top, so they're not very similar looking at all. It's just a matter of some people get confused sometimes, but there is noticeable differences between them. But anyway, this is our Copperhead. So now I can compare what I was wanting to do for our next viper. So here we have a much larger skull. We're going to go back to 1x zoom. This is our Gaboon viper, which is the snake with the largest fangs in the world. So these fangs get up to 2 inches long in a maximum size adult, which that's what this is, a maximum size adult. This is a 7-inch skull, and the ones for sale are often around 3.5 to 4 inches, which is pathetic because they get a lot larger than that, as evidenced here. And so we have these extremely long fangs that essentially would penetrate deep into the flesh of a human. They obviously do not, like, the funny thing is, they do not really need fangs this long for killing their prey, because they're eating rodents and things. A snake this big, like a Gaboon viper this big, is eating rodents that it wouldn't even need to open its jaw wider for. It could just swallow a rat whole like that. These guys get potentially up to 8 feet long in the absolute maximum. Usually they're smaller. But the thing is, a snake of this size isn't going to need to split its jaw, which this one is fused here. It's not supposed to be, but anyway, a snake of this size would not need to unhinge its jaw to eat its prey, because this guy is eating rats and stuff that are going to fit easily into this mouth. You can see how wide that is. That's a good over 4 inches wide. So the Gaboon viper is notorious for its long fangs and its extremely potent hemotoxic venom. Essentially, if you want to Google this, you can, but it's really disgusting. Their venom is so necrotic that when it bites you, it will essentially rot away all your flesh, all your muscle, till all that's left is bone. I've seen some pretty disgusting images out there of people literally just like they never treated it with the anti-venom, so their whole leg is just black and crispy and like essentially gone. Other photos where it's like there's no skin left, you see the muscle and the bone protruding through. It is disgusting. These guys have some of the worst like necrotic venom of any snake. Of course, rattlesnakes also have extremely potent necrotic venom. So even just getting bitten by a rattlesnake on the finger, you know, you could lose your finger, you could lose part of your hand, you could lose your whole hand. It's really just a gamble. Getting bit on the foot, you know, you can lose your foot. You can certainly lose all the skin on your foot and have to get skin grafts. But anyway, not good. So all the vipers, just you do not want to be bit by any viper. They are absolutely horrific in terms of their venom and the necrosis and the hemotoxin. So it is not good at all. This one is easier to see what I was talking about with the Diamondback. You can see here's a fang and here's a fang. But you can also see there's a spot right here and a spot right here. So this is the outer fang. This is the inner fang. So there could be a fang right here, right here, right here, and right here. And then it would have 4 2-inch long fangs in the front. However, like I say, it just has one on this side and one on this side, which conveniently are this time both on the right side. So I find that funny that for some reason it always ends up to be the ones on the same side. Anyway, we got the nose bone here. This is the whole nasal cavity. The pits. We have all these other teeth. You can see all of these large backwards curving teeth. This thing bites down on you. It will slice you open, but at the same time, it's going to be gripping into you. So you're essentially not getting your hand back out of its mouth. Although if it bit you here and the fangs missed you, you'd be kind of lucky. But of course, I guess this would slide back into you since they do rotate. So that would not be good. But anyway, we have the lower jaw here, which attaches onto this single bone, which fuses to the top of the skull, and then this bone, which kind of crosses over like that. You can see the eye kind of has this curvy bone around it. Once again, forward-facing eyes. They're towards the front of the skull rather than farther back. Top of the skull, we have some vertebrae. But you'll notice this, compared to our Diamondback, are very, very similar shapes. You'll see essentially vipers are kind of a uniform design in terms of their structure. Obviously, they vary quite a lot in size, as seen here, but their general skull shape is the same. You'll notice, though, the Gaboon viper is so much longer fangs proportionately than the Diamondback. But they all, like all vipers, have really big fangs compared to their head size, compared to some other snakes. Like king cobras actually have pretty small fangs compared to their head size. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, Gaboon viper here. And yeah, the largest head of any viper and the largest fangs of any snake. So pretty crazy. Once again, a pretty large eye. And I mean, these guys are the ones that blend in really well. So, they'll be laying in the dead leaves. Someone steps on them. That's when it lunges out and bites them. So essentially, they just kind of blend in and wait for their prey to come to them. And once again, they're eating small rodents and things like that. But yeah, a snake of this size is going to easily be able to swallow something like that whole without even needing to split its jaw wider. So that is our Gaboon viper. Next, we will compare with our longest species of viper and our, I think it's the third longest venomous snake in the world. This one is mounted on here, but I can take it off, which I'm going to. But this one is the South American Bushmaster. And the South American Bushmaster is the longest species of viper, reaching up to 13 or so feet long. And so this guy, also extremely potent venom. You can see these fangs are around 1.5 inches, maybe a little bit longer. This is the one I was talking to you about with the reserve fangs. You can see well. So we have, first of all, on this side, you can see it has both of the fangs on this side. So it does have the big one here and a second big one on this side. So it actually preserves both of them. This one's just folded back a bit. But then you can see in here, I've attached the reserve fangs on here. So each one of these, the biggest one is a little over 1 inch. Then they get a little bit smaller after that. But anyway, so the reserve fangs are essentially the ones that would grow into place after one of these two falls out. On this side, we just have this one long fang. So once again, we have the one on the outside, one on the inside. So once again, it's funny because it has, they're both on the same side. And then this one has the extra one. So technically it does have both of these ones just folded back. Then we have these really long teeth on the bottom jaw. And then the ones on the roof of the mouth, which once again, if this bites down on something, they curve backwards. It is not getting out of its mouth. And then it can walk its fangs back and forth to work the prey into its mouth easier than a cobra could, which would have to use its jaws. So from the top view on this one, it's a bit different than the Gaboon viper. The front of the skull is pretty wide. Here we have the whole nasal stuff going on. The pits. We have these little eye guard bones, which are slightly different than the other ones. The other ones, like the Gaboon viper, had a fused bone. This one is separate. But you'll notice with all of these that snake skulls are made up of so many different bones. We got two here, 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 and essentially all of this. Even the fangs are made up of multiple bones just to get that together. The jaw has all these multiple articulation points. Even the roof of the mouth with all the teeth, the vertebrae and all that. So anyway, so this is our big boy snake. Yeah, the South American Bushmaster also, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. The eyes are right here, so essentially very far forward on the skull. But yeah, this one would be absolutely brutal to be bitten by. It would have slightly less venom than the Gaboon viper, which I guess I should mention here. You can see, so right here we have a triangular shaped head, and they always say like, oh, the venomous ones have triangular shaped heads. Well, first of all, it's only vipers. The elapids do not have triangular shaped heads, at least not usually. Some water snakes have triangular shaped heads, but those are culibrids. Anyway, the triangular shape is because this is where the venom gland sits. So even though it like kind of curves in here, this is where the venom gland is. So it has one on each side. You can see for a snake this size, it's going to have some massive venom glands. If it pumped all that into you, because usually they don't inject all of it at once. If it were to pump all that into you, you're probably dead in like, I don't know, just a few minutes. Like that would be crazy. But usually they would not empty their entire sacks just because they need to save some of it for their prey. So it's not going to be quite as much as they have. Like I say, it's usually just a few drops or a tiny little bit, few milliliters. But anyway, big venom glands. And then we look back at the Bushmaster, and it has slightly smaller just because it's a smaller skull. And the funny thing is, yeah, this is a snake that is almost twice as long as the Gaboon viper. However, it is just not as big of a head. Gaboon vipers are very short and stout, kind of caterpillar-like, and these guys are more elongated. They have a really cool patterning too. Yeah, I really like Bushmasters. They're pretty cool. Okay, now we will move on to our next one, the Central American Bushmaster, which is a lot smaller. So this guy is the fourth longest species of venomous snake. This one is just about a foot shorter in length than the South American Bushmaster. So they're both very large venomous snakes, 12 foot, 13 foot for the other one. So very large venomous snakes. Once again, very venomous. Once again, you can see alternating fangs, which is just so weird. The little nose piece up here. The top of the skull. The vertebrae and the ribs. But yeah, it's pretty similar to the other one, so there's really not too much to talk about in terms of differences. Once again, these guys are rodent eaters, but there's really not too much difference between this and the other skull in terms of like anything notable to talk about, really. So it's essentially just pretty much the same thing. So we'll just quickly move on to the next one. Okay, so we have one last venomous snake, and it is in a different group. There's no good way to hold this one. Okay, I can get it by the bottom jaw. So this one you'll notice is a bit different. This one has much shorter fangs proportionately. Once again, we look at the front, and for some reason, once again, they're alternating fangs. So still interesting. Once again, this is not a viper. This is an elapid. This is a Indian cobra. So once again, not a triangular shaped skull. It's more round. And the eyes here, very large. Does not have the heat sensing pits. It does have the nose that goes in there, obviously, the nostrils. These fangs, we'll do the ×2 on this guy. These fangs are fixed in place. They do not fold in or out when it opens its mouth. So when it closes its mouth, its fangs are essentially stuck in that position. But once again, just like with the vipers, you'll see it does have spots for 4 fangs in the front. And this one does not have any reserve fangs in it, but they would be able to have some that could grow in. Once again, from the top view, you can see kind of it's kind of like an arrowhead almost. I mean, it is a little bit pointed, but you have to keep in mind that the actual like living snake does not have a triangular head like the vipers. But the venom glands still go in this area. They're smaller than on the vipers. Also, it's just a much smaller snake. You can see all of these tiny little teeth on the roof of the mouth and on the bottom jaw. Once again, holds its prey in its mouth so it can't escape. Venom gets injected in. These guys have a neurotoxic venom, so affects the nerves of their prey, shuts down the heart, and stops functioning to the brain. So essentially, the nerves can't communicate anymore, and the animal just shuts down and dies. Of course, the venom just kills it too. It's not just based on the function. Yeah, but anyway. So extremely destructive venom. These guys kill quite a lot of people every year. Here's our front view again. And maybe I can get a underside. There we go. Once again, the jaw is split in the front. These guys are also rodent eaters, which is kind of funny how all these guys are pretty much rodent eaters. Other than I should mention, copperheads actually will eat cicadas. So when we have those big old blooms of periodical cicadas, the copperheads just feast on them and eat them all. And so that's the thing, is copperheads are not strict rodent eaters. I mean, they eat all sorts of things like fish and stuff. So it's totally different than most of the other vipers and the Indian cobra here. Of course, king cobras, which essentially would be this skull but a lot longer, well, I guess larger, they eat other snakes, which is interesting. That's what their scientific name means, is snake eater. So it's pretty interesting. But yeah, these guys are helpful. They will, and most people actually welcome them, let them into their homes to feed on rodents, or at least around their homes to feed on rodents, because rodents are such a huge pest in India. Of course, there are people who are afraid of them and want them gone, but there are quite a lot of people who just love the snakes, and obviously they benefit from the snakes because these are eating the rodents. The only problem is people get bitten so often because, once again, they're in homes and near homes, so accidents happen. But overall, really good rodent controllers. So Indian cobras are good pest control, and they really help reduce the spread of disease by rodents. So extremely beneficial snakes. Also, you'll notice these guys have shorter neural spines on the vertebrae. When we looked at the Bushmaster, fang got stuck in the blanket. When we look at the Bushmaster, you'll see the neural spines on the vertebrae are much taller. So that's an interesting thing there. Yeah. So we'll move on to our non-venomous snakes. So, first one, we have a tiny little guy. Of course, he got stuck to the blanket again. Okay, so here we go. Really tiny guy. This is a common garter snake, and a very small individual at that, because you have to keep in mind they do get a lot larger. Now, there are like over 10 subspecies of common garter snake. This is just your typical, I don't even know what it is, but I do have a red-sided garter snake, which those are the ones that have the red and black checker marks on them. They're not the checkered garter snake, because that one is green and black checkers, but the red-sided garter snake is, I have a skull from one of these, a lot bigger. However, it's not in the video because it is still essentially head, doesn't have the flesh removed. However, in a few months, hopefully the flesh will be removed, and then it will be ready for display. But essentially, it would be 3 or 4 times longer than this guy. This guy is a little over a centimeter long. The other one is a much larger snake. That red-sided garter snake would have been around 4 feet long. I had the whole body. Essentially died in my garage and got all stinky and liquefied, so cut off the head of what was left, and yeah, anyway, pretty gross. But here we go. This is the little head of a probably foot long, or maybe a little over a foot long common garter snake. I don't know how well it's going to focus, but anyway, still has a bit of skin on it. You can see the super tiny teeth. Obviously, you'll notice the lack of fangs. There are no fangs there. Once again, the bottom jaw is split, so it can stretch to open things, like open its mouth to eat things much wider than its head. There's the top of the head once again. Sorry for the shakiness. I have neuromuscular problems. Anyway, very ovular shaped head. Nostrils in the front. Eyes are very large. But these guys are eating much smaller things like worms and stuff. Potentially, I could see it eating a shrew. Stuff like that. But anyway, much smaller snake, obviously. Like all the others have been essentially humongous compared to this guy. And so just your typical garden variety garter snake. Once again, very small guy. I should mention, I guess technically these guys do have venom, and technically they can kill you, so you can't rule that out of the equation. A garter snake could kill you, however, I don't think it's ever happened, because the only way for it to kill you is for it to be latched onto you and essentially pumping venom into you for 30 seconds or more. So the thing is that venomous snakes, they just bite and then they let go. Some non-venomous snakes will bite and they hold on, but even then they usually let go after a few seconds and they aren't pumping venom usually. But a garter snake like this, if it does latch onto you and doesn't let go, or you think it's funny because it's trying to swallow your finger and you just let it do that and whatever. Anyway, 30 or more seconds of that, it will pump enough venom into you that it will kill you. Because once again, not considered venomous, or at least not considered dangerous, because their venom can't just kill you from a single bite. But if they're pumping it that whole time, it's essentially builds up enough in your system that you can die from a quote non-venomous snake. But once again, these guys are now recognized as venomous. It's just recognized as non-significant venom. So it's not medically significant, as in it can't kill you, but technically it can if you let it. So don't let snakes try to swallow your finger, because that can lead to death. Anyway, there's our little guy. Next, we have another little guy. This one, I never figured out the species. People on Reddit were not helpful. I've asked on the bone collecting subreddit, I think 6 times for a skull ID, and not a single time did I get an actual answer, because apparently everyone on there is just jerks. And, well, I got, people being jerks to me at one point, and also just not capable of helping me. But the reason this one is so difficult is because you see these large kind of fang-looking things in the front, then all the other teeth are so minuscule. You can see how small those other teeth are, almost non-existent. This skull is about, almost, it's about 1.5 centimeters, so, one more, over 1.5 centimeters. So just a little bit under an inch. Not quite 2 centimeters, but anyway, still smaller than an inch. So, because an inch is 2.5 centimeters. So, anyway, this guy, once again, super big fangs in the front, and then tiny teeth in the back. Now, this is a non-venomous snake, which you can tell, it's not going to focus very well, but there's essentially no hollow canals in these fangs, so it means it can't inject venom, doesn't have venom glands, and so I don't know what kind of snake this is, other than I'm assuming it is a boa based on placement of the eyes. They're, more in the middle of the skull, and the fact that has slightly similar teeth structure, because most boas have really big fangs essentially lining their whole mouths. And also the fact that it was in the pet trade. So this is confirmed to be a species in the pet trade. So I was looking at, typical things that people sell, trying to find skulls of all these species. Couldn't find a match. It's obviously not like an emerald tree boa, green tree python, any of that stuff. Although I should also mention boas and pythons are not closely related at all. They're separated quite a bit on the family tree of snakes. But anyway, so I'm assuming it's a boa of some sort, potentially a python, because they still have very similar skulls. But I do not know the exact species. I just simply call it boa. Anyway, this is once again a more round-shaped skull. And let's see if I can get it to focus on the front. Come on. There we go. I mean, once again, you have the lower jaw separate, and it would be able to open that wide to eat prey that is a lot larger than its head. So this thing could probably eat something maybe 2 or so inches wide. So pretty massive. This snake probably would have been around 2 feet long, maybe 1.5 feet. The thing is, why it's like, because the seller didn't know the species. The seller isn't a snake expert. However, this body was so badly beaten up and like deteriorated that all he had was the head, and the head barely had any skin on it. So he preserved just the head, not the rest of the snake. And so unfortunately, he does not know what kind this is because there's essentially no evidence left of the living snake to figure it out. And it's hard to find images of the dead ones. You know, I checked Morphosource and all the other websites that literally have a database of snake skeletons and skulls, and I still couldn't find a match. So it, once again, very crazy, but it was in the pet trade and it is non-venomous. Those are the two things to know about it besides its actual structure. Like, you know, the teeth and all that. But it is crazy how small those teeth are and then how big the ones in the very front are. So I call it a boa. Who knows what it actually is? And once again, it's probably not a boa constrictor, so it's technically not a boa, but something similar. And our last species, we're going to have to zoom out, and I might have to move all of these over. Actually, I'm going to put the Bushmaster back onto its stand. Just right through the vertebrae. There we go. Oop, bump the camera. Okay. Got to move all the little guys. Okay, you guys ready for this one? This one is crazy, and barely anyone has one of these because of the I don't know, just the simple fact of what it is. There we go. Doesn't even fit on the camera. Here we have Titanoboa. So very big snake. This is a 17-inch skull, which is approximately the size of Titanoboa's head. Now, Titanoboa was a species that grew up to 51 feet long. So the largest individual we have was a 51-foot individual. However, we have multiple other individuals that were 50 feet or smaller. So we know that this snake regularly reached the lengths over 45 feet and usually above 48, because we have a whole cave full of them that were like 49 foot plus, essentially, plus a few smaller ones. Females are a lot bigger than males, so this would be a female. Like, males would be probably half the size of a female, and the ones in the cave that were smaller would have been males. Anyway, essentially only found in one location, the Sarajan. I don't know how to pronounce it. Anyway, I think it's Sarajan. I don't know. Hard to pronounce, or at least I'm not good at pronouncing it, but don't make fun of me. Anyway, so Titanoboa is a very big snake. The thing to keep in mind, they discovered Vasuki in 2024, which was thought to be up to 50 feet long. However, it would have weighed less than Titanoboa. Not to mention the biggest Titanoboa was 51 feet. So Vasuki is not the largest snake of all time. Titanoboa still holds the crown. Anyway, we have the nostrils on the top. We have kind of a sagittal crest here. Big, sturdy bones. Like, I mean, this thing would easily take out, you know, big crocodilians and stuff. Once again, the jaw would split out to the side. So this thing is swallowing things. Let's see. So usually they say it's about 5 times the length of the head. So, I mean, that would be, I don't know, probably around 7 feet wide. Maybe a little bigger, smaller. I don't want to do the math, but, you know, 17 inches and then times 5. So, okay. Yeah, that'd be bigger than 7 feet, I think. Anyway, big prey items, so take out crocodilians and stuff like that. And even if it wasn't able to swallow it, it could still kill it by constricting it, like in that documentary. So if something's trying to kill it, it can still take the advantage, kill it, and then just slither away, swim away, whatever. So, semi-aquatic snake. Lots and lots of teeth. We can see some of these teeth would be almost 3 inches long. And this guy essentially would have around 100 of those, because it has some in the roof of the mouth in there. That one's loose, you can see anyway. All the ones on the roof of the mouth, the ones on the outside of the jaw, and then only one row on the bottom jaw. But Anyway, a lot of teeth, and would be feeding on massive prey items, mostly aquatic things. You know, like it was thought they fed on lungfish, crocodilians, stuff like that. Um, they essentially could grow really large because of the habitat they were in. It was just a lot warmer at the time, and they were by the equator. And as with modern snakes, the largest ones are by the equator, like green anacondas and reticulated pythons. So typically, the closer they are to the equator and the warmer it is, the bigger the snakes can grow. And that is just simply because if it's warmer, they don't have to focus as much of their energy on metabolism and stuff. Their metabolism is faster. So instead, their energy goes into growing. So instead of just wasting it all on digesting food, that happens at its own fast pace, and they can just keep growing larger and larger and larger without limits, essentially. So pretty cool. And once again, they probably could have got larger than 51 feet just because if we have a dead one, usually they don't just die of old age or something. If we find a fossil, usually it got covered quickly or fell into a pit or something like a sand trap or tar, you know, something like that. So, or like if it's aquatic, you know, sometimes just things will collapse on them and they'll get covered by sand or sediment, or sand dunes collapse on, you know, like Protoceratops and Velociraptor fighting, stuff like that. So Titanoboa essentially probably could have gotten bigger than 51 feet long, but that's just what we know because that's what we have. Anyway, very cool snake. And this one was 3D printed. So it's pretty cool. I added in some more teeth because it was missing some. But that is our big old Titanoboa. And that is it for our snake segment. Next, we are going to move on to the lizards, since the lizards happen to be in the same group, the Squamata. So they're all squamates. I also have a worm lizard. So we're going to be going to the lizards next. Okay, now for part 2, I have 4 lizard skulls and 4 lizard skeletons for a total of 8 lizards we'll be looking at. And so I thought the best way to start off would be looking at the Zarudny's worm lizard skull. So Zarudny's worm lizard is a species of worm lizard, and worm lizards are true lizards, and they are closely related to tegus, wall lizards, and race runners. Now this is a very small animal. This thing would be around, I think they get up to like a foot long, so not very large. And they're called worm lizards because they kind of look like worms a bit. The key feature of Zarudny's worm lizard is this kind of flat forehead, like you'll see from kind of this angle here. And actually, let me zoom in. There we go. Okay. You'll see it kind of just slopes, kind of like pointed upward a little bit. But yeah, it has this very flat forehead. And that is the key defining feature of Zarudny's worm lizard. Like if you Google photos of these guys, they're kind of funny looking because their forehead is just, yeah, just kind of flattened and downward pointing. These guys are burrowers, so they'll be in the ground. Here's the top view. You can see kind of like decently sized brain case, foramen magnum in there, just like you'd see in the mammals and all that, since it's a vertebrate. We have a detachable jaw. You'll see these little teeth. So it has some little tiny teeth in there, which are pretty cool. And then the bottom jaw also has little teeth. I bet it would get hurt. I bet it would hurt to get bit by one of these. However, I do not know. But considering that a lot of lizards hold on, it probably would hurt quite a bit. Anyway, here's this guy. Then this would essentially hook on. It's going to be really hard to show just based on the fact that it's small, but essentially just is, yeah, I can't really show it. But anyway, the jaw just kind of chomps a little bit. Really hard to actually show. But anyway, it fits nice and well. The teeth interlock there. So yeah, pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, just a cute little guy. Okie dokie. So we will move on now to our next three skulls. The next three are all monitor lizards. So we will start by looking at this one here. Of course, we'll have to go back to 1x. Okay. So this is a Savannah monitor, which these guys are kind of bulkier monitor lizards. You can see from the side view here that it kind of just slants. They have a very weirdly shaped head. Very interesting shaped skull. You'll notice also there are two types of teeth. So this is heterodont. We have these big crushing ones in the back, and then these sharp ones in the front. So a lot of sharp ones in the front for tearing and cutting, back ones for crushing. Same thing on the top. We got those sharper ones in the front and the wider, flatter, fat ones in the back. So here, since this is a monitor lizard, you will see this little tiny dot here. Now that dot is its third eye, so it essentially detects light and stuff like that. So it can't really like see like these two eyes can, but it is light sensitive and stuff like that. So it aids them. Otherwise, it wouldn't have it if it didn't help them out. But anyway, you can see these skulls of lizards and monitor lizards in general, made up of so many different bones. I mean, we got bone, 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 bone. Like, you know, even the bottom jaw is like multiple different bones. You got one here, one here. There's some stuff on the inside that goes in. Like, it's complex. So anyway, monitor lizards are very complicated, constructed species. But yeah, they just have so many bones in their skull, which technically mammals do too. They're just better fused. But anyway, you'll see foramen magnum here. The brain case is this tiny little thing in here. So essentially its brain is almost non-existent. Poor dude. But these guys will feed on eggs and smaller animals. These are common pets. I'm sure someone has seen a Savannah monitor as a pet. They're pretty common for monitor lizards. You'll see the big nostrils here, really good sense of smell. That takes up this whole part of the skull here, just goes right back in these two big nostrils. Once again, large eyes, so would have a fairly good sense of sight, and also it can see directly forward, sign of a predator, so its eyes can look straight forward and lock onto you. Actually, this angle kind of looks like a seal skull. It's kind of interesting. I can kind of see that. Huh, weird. Anyway, so can lock on you from in front. You can obviously see to the sides also. So has a good field of vision. And these guys, like this individual would probably be around 4 feet long. So pretty large Savannah monitor. I do not know their maximum size, but I don't think they get too much larger than that. Like this might be a peak size individual. I don't know. Anyway, we'll compare that to our next monitor lizard, which this one has drastically different teeth. So this one, these are all long and curved backwards and pointed, so all sharp and good for tearing. So this would take essentially any smaller animal it grips onto and rips it apart. These would be slightly serrated, however the points are going to be too, like the serrations are going to be too hard to, like you won't be able to see them from this view. You would need a microscope to see them, but they're there. You'll see the ones in the front of the mouth are more conical and kind of rounded, you know, just conical in general. The one here, the very bottom is super flat and thin, and then all these on the side are longer and more slim, kind of like shark teeth. But interestingly, the ones in the front are actually conical, but they still curve backwards quite a bit. So that's an interesting thing here. So obviously here we have the eye. Once again, we have these kind of eyebrow bones, as I call them. We have all these intricate other pieces. The third eye right here, you can see that little dot. It's a very narrow skull, like when we compare these two. Savannah monitor is wider. It's also a larger skull though, so keep that in mind. But anyway, it is wider. It kind of slopes more. Like if you look at the water monitor here, it's just slightly different here. It's just essentially is a straight line in terms of the slanting. Once again, big nostrils. But yeah, the teeth is a huge difference. Anyway, so yeah, this is our Asian water monitor. So aquatic species, not like it'd be semi-aquatic. So this is a decently sized individual. However, some of those water monitors can get 7 or 8 feet long, and this one is nowhere near that big. So this is still a young one. But anyway, pretty cool. And it does look a lot like a Komodo dragon skull, as you would imagine. Like, we got these sharp teeth, pointed skull, very Komodo dragon-y. Like, you could mistake it for a young Komodo dragon, honestly. If you just look at the skull, they're pretty similar. But if we compare that to the actual Komodo dragon, right here, this is a huge difference. Once again, comparing both of these, you will see they're extremely similar. So you can see all the bones essentially the same, just different sizes. Teeth very similar, and just the shape is also very similar. So overall, very similar skulls. However, these are two separate species. The Asian water monitor is a smaller one, and this one is a Komodo dragon. This one, the third eye is a lot larger, but that's because it is a larger individual, obviously. This is a 8-inch skull, if I remember correctly. So third eye here. We have the bigger eyebrow bones. These kind of like guard pieces along the eye. It's kind of cool how it just has armor around the eye. Very large eye. Massive nostrils. You can see these things are more on the top of the head here. Huge pits. So once again, comparing these two, you can see those huge pits on the top of the skull. However, once again, you'll notice here, essentially it is a U shape, whereas this one is a V shape. So the water monitor is more pointed and the Komodo dragon is more rounded. So that is a key difference between these two species. However, young Komodo dragons will also have a more pointed snout. But yeah, we have a very U-shaped snout. So this would take a bigger bite out of a prey animal. It would essentially rip out that chunk of meat. Once again, these guys have serrated teeth, just like the little guy. So Komodo dragon takes out essentially anything it wants. Komodo dragon is one of the most overpowered animals in nature. I mean, they're bulletproof. They're essentially stab-proof. These guys will take down water buffalo on their own. Single bite is all it takes, but it's actually a myth that they will sit there and kind of wait for it to die. They will sometimes straight up just rip things apart and kill them. These have been known to gang up on water buffalo and just rip them apart. Like, it's not always them just waiting there and essentially just biting it, waiting for it to die. They will attack these. They're fully capable of killing it all by themselves. And sometimes they'll do it in groups. But the interesting thing is they don't always do that. They are kind of interesting because they know that they don't need to do that. So sometimes they are lazy and they will just bite it and then just kind of sit back, wait for it to die. That's the interesting thing, is that Komodo dragons are probably the most intelligent reptile alive on the planet at this current day and age, not counting birds. Monitor lizards are extremely intelligent, and Komodo dragons are at top tier there. Komodo dragons, essentially, they can coordinate attacks, which is most animals can't do that except for pack hunters. And even then, some aren't as good of coordinating. Some kind of just scare the prey or whatever. But Komodo dragons are really kind of overpowered. Their tail is so thick and muscular that it can slap a horse in the legs and break them and knock the horse over, which is kind of crazy considering these guys are so much smaller than a horse. So it's kind of interesting, but they're kind of nature's super weapon. We have these little pits here, and these guys can smell for miles away, so they can track down something they've bitten and go find it. But once again, it's kind of funny because they have the capability to kill all those big animals, and yet part of the time they just bite it once and follow it, which is kind of crazy because they don't need to waste all that energy. They know they don't need to. So that's how powerful they are, is they know one bite is all they need to kill anything. And I mean, though I've seen videos of them swallowing goats whole. I mean, they're crazy. Like, these guys are just brutal. And like I say, anything gets in front of them, if they want to eat it, they're killing it. And nothing gets away from these guys once it's bitten. It's not good. And they have been known to kill people. And people in, like on Komodo Island, when they're buried after they die, they have to be buried under 10 feet of concrete, because if they're not, the Komodo dragons will smell them and dig them up. So that's not good. Anyway, very brutal killing machine. You know, look at all those teeth. Very dangerous. Would not want to get bit by one of these. Even if it didn't have a temotoxic venom, still would not be pretty. I mean, that'd be pretty damn bloody. And essentially with these guys, instead of having hollow teeth that they inject venom through like snakes, when they bite something, the venom glands are in the jaw, so it kind of pumps venom into the wound. So like it bites down and then the venom soaks into the bloodstream through that, through the opening in the jaw where the glands are. So it's pretty crazy. It mixes with their saliva essentially. Pretty awesome. But yeah, makes them extremely deadly. So yeah, Komodo dragons are not something you want to mess with. But yeah, so essentially, super deadly predator. It's not good. Okay, next we will move on to our skeletons. So first up, let me see if I can grab this without it getting stuck. Okay, there we go. I worry about these things sticking to the blanket because of their claws. I gotta hold it in this hand, just due to the way my camera is positioned. Okay, here it is. This is a prairie lizard, which is a North American species. This is pretty much as big as they get. And so they are kind of like a prairie type species. They like rocky habitat, grassy habitat, stuff like that. So grasslands, kind of arid areas. They're pretty cool. But anyway, so this little guy, prairie lizard, you'll see with this one, let's go to the ×2 zoom. You can see this one has eye rings preserved, so that's the ossicle, the bone that is within its eye. This guy also has a third eyelid. You can see that hole in the top of the head where my fingernail is pointing. So it also has a hole on the top of its head for the third eye. It is larger proportionately than the Komodo dragon and the other monitor lizards, but it does have both of those sclerotic rings in the eye. You can see its nostrils, and it's going to be hard to see, but it essentially has little tiny teeth. Yeah, you can see those little tiny teeth in those jaws, which is kind of cool. Also, you can see the claws, so very sharp claws. All lizards have very long claws. It's pretty interesting. Most of them are kept sharp. However, some lizards kind of have more dull ones. Komodo dragons, for instance, have some pretty long nails, and they're really good for digging and stuff like that. The young ones climb trees. Interestingly, Komodo dragons can swim too. Anyway, so then we have kind of the arms, a little bit short. And you'll notice with these guys, most lizards are this way, where essentially their ring finger is the longest, which is kind of opposite to us, where our middle finger is the longest. But it is kind of interesting that that's how their feet are structured. It's cool to look at. The front feet on this guy are more similar in length. Obviously, the thumb is still the shortest, but like the back feet, you can see, once again, short thumb or big toe, whatever you want to call it. Not very big in this one. And the ring finger is the longest there. Then it has a long tail. There's still some skin on this part. But that is our little prairie lizard. And you can see about half the body length is tail here. So yeah. So there's our prairie lizard. Next, we will move on to our other kind of, I don't know, just non-gecko, because the last two are geckos. That's what I mean by other kind of whatever, I don't know, just non-gecko. Oh, we're gonna have to go back to 1 times. This guy, super long dude here, this is the main forest lizard. Might be kind of hard to show. We're gonna go back to 2 times to see the skull. So we have big eyes here, very large eyes. Once again, it does have the third eye, super tiny dot, hard to see though because my fingers are shaking because of my neuromuscular problems. The nostrils on the top of the head, the teeth, which we will look at. Essentially, they kind of fit like, if you're like, when you're a kid and you maybe drew a picture of a dinosaur or a shark or something with teeth that just kind of interlock perfectly. That is essentially what these are. They're literally zigzag teeth that interlock perfectly. So it's kind of interesting. But that's what its teeth look like. Essentially just zigzags. It's pretty cool. So once again, this is just a bigger individual than the prairie lizard. So here's the hands, super tiny thumb, then the longer other fingers. Here we have the humerus, which is kind of long. Radius and ulna are also pretty long, so this one has much longer legs proportionately than the prairie lizard. The back legs, we got a big femur, and then the tibia and fibula kind of long too, though not as long proportionately. Really long hind limbs. Once again, we have a kind of a short thumb there, and then really long middle and ring finger. The pinky is actually short in this guy. Ribs are kind of messed up, but whatever, they're still there. Very, 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 very long tail. So once again, we can see this. The tail on this guy, that is being held straight out in front of the camera, and there it fits all on screen. The body from like the tip of the snout to the pelvis is maybe 5 inches, and then the rest of the tail is like, I think 14. So very long tail for this guy. Tip still has a bit of skin, that's why it's black, as opposed to the rest of the body, which is just skeleton. So pretty interesting though, because yeah, very, very, very long tail. The other thing you'll notice, which is kind of hard to see, at least comparing with the others, but you will see here, if I can pick it up. Come on, don't get stuck. Okay. You will see pelvis here, which you see these 2 little things sticking out forward. That is essentially the back of the pelvis. So whoever decided to glue this together, whoever glued this together decided to, whether purposefully or not, attach the pelvis on backwards. I think it was on purpose because they sell them all like this, and whether the guy realizes that it is wrong or not, or it's just easier to put on, who knows. Either way, these spikes should be pointing backwards, which you will see with our next guy right here. Oop, should pick him up by the front arm, not the back. The crested gecko, there you see that, the pelvi, spikes pointing back on the gecko, spikes pointing forward on the main forest lizard, and that's just a problem because all the other lizards have them pointing backwards. So this guy was just glued together wrong by the seller, and I'm sure all the other sellers also glued them wrong because I've not seen one of those correct. So I don't know, just it's a habit. People just don't know how they go apparently. I don't know. So this was my crested gecko Maddox. He died a few years back, like I think it was my senior year in high school when he died. So it's been over 4 years now since he has passed, and just I think 2 years ago or less, I got him skeletonized. So that's cool because now I have a skeleton, but I just saved him in the freezer. Maddox here was named after my friend who was killed in a car crash when he was 9. So not good at all, and I miss him a lot. But so named my gecko after him. And then years later, the gecko died. But here's a skeleton of Maddox. So you can see big eye rings. So let me get that ×2 again. Very large eyes on this skull. There's the eye ring. There's the other side's eye ring. So large eyes. This one, I actually do not know. I don't think it has a third eye. If it does, it's not very visible. Hold on. No, I don't think they do because the other gecko doesn't have it either. So I don't think these guys have a third eye, but the other 5 we looked at, the 2 skeletons and the monitor lizards, did. Anyway, so Crested gecko. This guy's little, oh man, I'm shaking so much. Little tiny teeth there. So you can see those little pegs in the mouth, essentially. So these guys, if it bit you when it was alive, it wouldn't have hurt too much. They can still kind of put some force into it, but their teeth aren't going to really draw blood or anything. The Tokay gecko, however, those things have a nasty bite, more force behind the jaws, and they can definitely draw blood, and yeah, it will hurt. But crested geckos generally don't bite to begin with. I've seen videos of them biting people. Don't know why they do, because mine never did. He was really calm and gentle. So I don't know. Anyway, you can see those little claws. It's not as cool as you would expect because, you know, the pads are gone, so no cool gecko feet on this guy. But you can still see how those toes articulate, and that's really cool. So little claws, little grippers. Their toes bend backwards at the tips, whereas other lizards don't do that. That's so that they can kind of like, here, let's go back to one. That's so that instead of like bending this way, they bend backwards, so they can like let go of whatever they're holding onto if they're holding onto a surface that they're sticking to, like glass, for instance. So it's kind of cool. Backwards facing toes. These guys can lose their tail. However, it will not grow back. Other geckos can lose their tails, and they will grow back, just like the leopard gecko, for instance. Whereas crested geckos, once they lose it, it's gone. So glad mine still has his tail. But anyway, there he is. Nice set of ribs on there. You can see the overall shape of the lizard here. So he was obviously quite a bit fatter than this in real life. You know, there's all the muscle and skin and all that. But anyway, there he is. Once again, you can see the head here. Let's get a focus on there. Nostrils on the very front of the head. So snout is all the way to the tip, whereas you saw on the monitor lizards, their nostrils were farther back, at least the opening was, so larger canals. But these guys have the opening in the very front of their skull. You can see kind of the inner ear area. There's some clay kind of holding this together. But overall, you can still see the general head shape. You can see he actually has the, it's kind of hard to see, right here, he has the voice box intact. So this little structure here is essentially its voice box, called a hyoid bone. And there's multiple hyoid bones that come together to form that. So that's really cool. I honestly forgot he even had that preserved, but that's amazing. Once again, he would have a tiny little brain. Even though it looks like it could fit in all that space, it's just a little pebble in there. Unfortunately, they don't have very big of brains. And I mean, monitor lizards have, like I say, they're really intelligent, but even looking at a Komodo dragon brain, it fits just into this tiny little piece in here. So essentially, it can't be very large at all, like maybe at maximum the size of a pea. I'm not sure, but like really, for an animal that big, its brain is tiny. Kind of unfortunate, but I guess they do all they need to do. They can function perfectly fine with a brain that size, so doesn't affect them negatively. So that's cool. Imagine if their brains were larger, then they might take over the world. Okay, here's our last lizard. This is the Tokay gecko. So this is the one that if it bites you, it's going to hurt a lot. It can draw blood. Here you will see it actually does have the pads preserved. So you can see the little toe pads here. Man, I'm getting shaky. But there they are, little toe pads. So there's the little toes with the little grippers. Once again, the feet, the very tips of the toes bend backwards. So that is how they release their grip from things. Nice ribs on there. We have a tail, once again, can drop off. So they all have their kind of, like all the geckos are famous for their detachable tails. Of course, other lizards can do it, like legless lizards, glass lizards and that stuff. Anyway, this, once again, pelvis is facing backwards, which is the correct way. I mean, like the spikes are facing backwards, which is the correct way, whereas that maned forest lizard was on backwards. So here, this one does not have the eye rings, but you can see once again it has large eyes, just like the crested gecko, nostrils in the very front. The teeth are very similar to the crested gecko, little pegs. However, these ones are slightly more pointed, and essentially just more powerful jaws. Larger animal equals more painful experience when it bites you. This one does not have the hyoid bone preserved, but you can see little scapulas, clavicle, thin little arm bones. It's amazing how thin their arm bones are. There'd be a lot of meat on there to make up for that. They kind of have loose skin too, a little bit, kind of wrinkly. If you know geckos, they're kind of interesting. Kind of like a sphinx cat, like just wrinkly and bald. I don't know, kind of funny. Super tiny scales. But yeah, you can see here the inner area. Once again, the brain is up in this tiny little thing. So the brain on this guy is like the size of a piece of rice, like just a single grain of rice. Or maybe even smaller than that. Like I said, just tiny little brains. But all reptiles tend to have small brains. I mean, even alligators and crocodiles have small brains. It's just a feature of reptiles. But yeah. So yeah, this one does not have the third eye. It does have this kind of region in here that's lighter, but that's just kind of where the bone is thinner. It's not a third eye. So just, and you can see throughout the bones just vary in color based on how thick it is. Yeah, these are the polka dot guys, and they got their name from the noise they make, because they sound like they make the sound Tokay. So it's kind of cool. But yeah, that's our Tokay gecko. So these guys, actually, the funny thing is, Tokay geckos are supposed to max out at 12 inches. This is a 13-inch skeleton, so I think that's pretty cool that it's actually larger than what they should be. Of course, there's some other species that kind of get big too. But anyway, and I mean, the crested gecko is also one of those larger ones. Technically, it's called the giant crested gecko or crested giant gecko, one of those two. I can't remember. Either way, they're also one of the largest geckos. Day geckos are pretty large. There's like the New Caledonian giant gecko, I think. Anyway, pretty cool. They can get massive. I've seen some pretty fat geckos. They're fun. And I've actually caught some wild geckos that were, I guess, invasive, but on my college campus, I caught 2 of them. One was a baby, and they're just the Mediterranean geckos that had gotten loose. Someone must have released them or something, and they survived through the winter, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, obviously invasive species, because they should not be in Kansas. Anyway, that is it for the lizards, and next we're going to move on to the turtles. Okay, on to the turtles. So the first turtle we'll look at is the painted turtle. So a feature of all the turtles, you'll notice very large eyes proportionate to body size, and their nose is essentially just one big cavern. There's not 2 separate holes, it is just one big hole. Obviously they have a beak that they use for biting into things. This one you can see kind of 2 little spikes on top, and this one pointed one on the bottom that fits into that. The ears back here, these big holes. And sadly, I do not have any turtle skulls with a detachable bottom jaw. I glued them all on to keep from losing them a long time ago, and because some of them were falling apart. But yeah, this one you can see it's actually missing the bone that goes right here in the very back that attaches with the vertebrae and the foramen magnum. It's essentially missing, so it has a much larger hole here. You can see all the way throughout the other side, through the eyes. But anyway, essentially missing that backbone, which you'll be able to see in the other turtle skulls I have. And yeah, there's still a little bit of skin up there. Anyway, painted turtle, really pretty turtle. The underside of their shell is like all orange and red and yellow, which is how they got their name, painted turtle, because they look like they're painted. They're so pretty. They They're really cool. But you'll notice they have this long, I don't know if this counts as a sagittal crest or not, but probably does, especially looking at the structure. Anyway, just points backwards very sharply. Their heads kind of triangular shaped, kind of just pointed. But yeah, overall pretty cool. Not too much to say about this guy, other than it's our generic turtle, kind of. Next we have the red-eared slider. So this is a slightly larger skull. Once again, this is what I was talking about. It has this bone in the back that essentially connects this top part of the sagittal crest to the bottom of the palate. So it has that extra bone there. You can see in the foramen magnum, missing a chunk of like the back of the skull here. This part's missing. This one has a more defined sagittal crest, longer, thicker. You know, we compare it with this, much thicker. So yeah, unless that's just broken off. It could be missing that piece. But like that could be part of what's missing is that back piece. I don't know. Anyway, red-eared slider has a longer pointed backwards, like its crest goes farther back. Once again, very large eyes, large nose. This one has the little bottom keratin sheath, like the keratin sheath on the bottom jaw. It doesn't have the one on the top jaw. Once again, we have our bottom jaw here that would just open and shut, giving it a powerful bite. The ears, this big hole here and here. Top of the skull, this one's more ovular, but still kind of triangular in shape. So kind of interesting there. Yeah, you'll notice very forward-facing eyes. So yes, it can see to the side, but this is interestingly looking straight at you. If this turtle is, well, most turtles are looking at you. They're literally looking at you because their eyes are just right there in the front. So it's kind of interesting feature of turtles. Yeah, here's a palate in here. Obviously with turtles, they don't have any teeth. They just have a beak that can cut through things pretty well. Next, we have our common snapping turtle. And so this one, very large backwards pointing crest. It has a lot of dirt on it. I couldn't really ever get that off. And I don't want to damage the skull. The skull's way too delicate. I had to glue it already and it's, yeah, coming apart. But anyway, very far pointed back sagittal crest. This one is very triangular, kind of arrowhead shaped. And then this large crest that points all the way back. You know, we compare that with the red-eared slider, and it's more of a triangular shape, more, well, I guess more arrowhead, and a much longer crest. The tip of the snout is more pointed as opposed to the red-eared slider, which is more rounded. And here we have the huge eyes, the nose. This one has both the top and bottom keratinous sheaths on here. So you can see the little pointed beak that is characteristic of the snapping turtles. Has the patterning even because it's the actual keratin you would see on the live animal. Ears back here. Little tiny brain that would go in here. There's a palate. You can see it's coming apart, which is why it's glued. Once again, glued the bottom jaw on just because I was worried about it like breaking or whatever. I don't know, but anyway, kind of glued with the sheath on there. So yeah, you can see the little hook right here, like a bird of prey. So yeah, and I mean these guys will feed on all sorts of things: frogs, fish, snakes. So kind of interesting. I mean, sometimes they'll eat rodents and stuff. This one is a very small individual. Skull is a little over 3 inches long. However, that is tiny because they certainly get a lot larger, which I have evidenced by this one here, which we're going to have to go back to 1x. So this is a partial common snapping turtle skull. So this one is even more triangular. It's a lot larger. You know, we compare these two. You can see the size difference here. So as it gets older, it kind of gets wider and more fat, I guess. I don't know. Very large crest. The crest got thicker because you can see with this one, it's also like not as tall here. Like it's kind of tall, but still nothing compared to how tall this is. These are very developed here in the back. Here's the ears. And essentially I found this in so many pieces, had to glue it all together. But this was buried in the ground. I had dug this up because I saw some bones sticking up. So I think it's funny that I found it, but this is all I could find from the skull. You can see it has the keratin beak here, the eye, the big old nose, and then from this side you can see most of the general shape. However, like I say, it is missing the bottom jaw. However, funnily enough, I did find the keratin sheath of the bottom jaw, but not the bottom jaw itself. So anyway, this would fit in here. So you can see there's the beak, and it kind of just goes in. So this piece fits in right there. So kind of cool how it just fits in there. But like I say, did not have the bottom jaw, unfortunately. But anyway, this would be about like here, snap shut. So pretty cool that I at least have that piece, but yeah, kind of weird that I never found the bottom jaw. Anyway, the sheath, and then the top of the skull, which the rest of it I literally just glued together piece after piece. Some of these are only held on by the keratin here, like this piece. It's essentially I just glued onto the keratin, and then the rest of the skull here you can see, you know, piece here, piece, all sorts of pieces. So anyway, but yeah, this is a 5-inch skull. They will get slightly bigger than this. I mean, technically they can get a lot bigger because this is like pretty large adult. However, there's an individual that lives at the Heston Arboretum in Heston, Kansas, and it probably has a 7-inch or larger skull. It is definitely a common snapping turtle, not an alligator snapping turtle. However, it is so massive that it's probably around 5 feet long, counting the tail and the neck. You know, the shell itself is probably around 3 feet. It is massive, and it will come right up to you if it's still alive. I don't know, like it might be. I mean, turtles live a long time, but I mean, it's got to be like near the end of its life based on how massive it is. But it will go right up to you expecting food, and people go there just to feed them. So yeah, but anyway, so while this is large, I know they get larger because I've personally seen with my own 2 eyes a turtle that would put this skull to shame. And like I say, it's just a common snapper. The alligator snappers get a whole lot bigger. They'll have up to a 10 or 11-inch skull at the absolute maximum. So that's pretty crazy. I would love to get a replica skull from one. But I don't know. Maybe someday. So that is our essentially full-grown adult common snapping turtle. Next, I have a baby common snapping turtle. So this one's kind of hard to look at. We're going to go back to the 2x zoom. So anyway, little tiny baby. This is, I don't know if it'd be considered a newborn or what. I don't know how old it is exactly, other than probably would be about a newborn. Anyway, we found it dead in my yard. So I don't know how it got there, but we do have we have a pond nearby, but I just think it would be weird that it would wander all the way into my yard from the pond. Like it would have had to cross several streets, and I just don't know why it would do that, but whatever. Anyway, so little tiny guy. You can see massive eyes, the little nose in the front, little tiny jaw. Also, you'll notice differently shaped. The sagittal crest is very small, points downward. It doesn't actually point up and back very much. It's not very long. So essentially, they grow into their skull shape. Once again, kind of rounded, but still kind of triangular, arrowhead, whatever. But yeah, as they grow, their skull will elongate and develop into the typical shape here. But there's the size difference. This one's probably old enough to reproduce, so it could be having babies about this size probably. The big one would have probably more babies. It's not like the eggs are going to be any bigger. At least I don't think so. I don't think that's how that works. Anyway, so there's our tiny little guy. You can just see tiny little beak there. Still has the keratin. Yeah, cute little baby common snapping turtle. Yeah, I think it would be a newborn or hatchling, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, tiny guy, and it's sad that it didn't make it. So, yeah, no clue. I don't know, maybe a bird killed it or something. I don't know. Anyway, that is it for our turtles. And now we will move on to our crocodilians. Okay, first up for the crocodilians, we have the American alligator. So obviously this is a North American species, and the American alligator is one of only 2 species of alligator. There's also the Chinese alligator, and then there's also caimans, which are closely related. The American alligator is a very large alligator. It's the largest alligator by far, because the Chinese alligator is like up to 5 feet or so, so it's pretty small. Anyway, so we have big eyes here. Notice how they are on top of the skull. So when it's like floating in the water, its eyes are able to see above the water. Same thing with the nose. It is on top of the skull. You can see 2 distinct nostrils here, although it's one main hole, but still is interesting because it has this little split here. We'll see in a bit that the crocodile does not have that. So I think the ears are here. We also have these additional holes in the skull. And from the back, we have the foramen magnum here. So the spine attaches on there. Once again, we have a tiny little brain in there. You can see just like it's not very big at all. It'd be just in here. Probably, yeah, smaller than a pea. So kind of crazy. But anyway, so American alligator. And these guys are obviously carnivores, and they will eat turtles and snakes and fish and essentially other aquatic animals, since they're semi-aquatic. Then we can take a look at this. I am assuming some of the teeth are going to fall out because whoever prepared the skull bleached it, I think, which is why it's falling apart, because that's what happens when you bleach them. You're supposed to use peroxide instead of bleach, because it's also abnormally colored. I don't know, like it's too white. Anyway, we'll put this on ×2 and tap here. Okay, so you can see these teeth. They are mostly conical. However, if you look at the top view, they're actually more kind of flattened, which is interesting, because yeah, they're supposed to be conical, but the ones here are more flattened down the side. The ones in the front curve backwards. But you will notice the change in the teeth. These ones curve backwards and they're more conical. Then as they go back, they get more flat and flattened that way, and then more spiky and less like sharp. They're more like peg-like, sticking straight up instead of curving backwards. And the ones in the very back are just little pegs, essentially tiny little ones. But yeah, there is our bottom jaw. The thing you'll notice, which is interesting about crocodilians, is that the bottom jaw is bigger than the top jaw. So, and I'll explain that in a bit. So now looking at the top jaw, we have all the teeth here once again. So we have the shorter peg-like ones, the longer crushing ones. I mean, also the ones in the back can crush turtle shells. That's what those are used for. They're better for that. The ones in the front are more gripping. Of course, they'll do death rolls to rip things apart, or just shake their head side to side, and that will rip things apart really easily. And as you can see, it kind of curves up with their teeth there. So it is pretty interesting. But when we compare that, well, and you can see it's missing a few teeth. When we compare that with the bottom jaw, first of all, you'll notice right here, in here, there's a hinge joint. So the skull essentially sits up here and then slams down like that. So I'm sure you guys know about the thing where you can tape an alligator's mouth shut or even just hold it shut with your hands. And that is due to the simple reason that, as I just showed you, these hinges here are actually the alligator's weakness. Because instead of, so like a mammal, for instance, has a bottom jaw that opens like this. The bottom, it doesn't work too well. The bottom jaw is the one that bites, whereas in the alligator, it's the top jaw that bites. So, you know, humans, our bottom jaw moves. With the alligators and crocodiles, their top jaw moves. And because of this, and also because the hinge joint, once again, the bottom is longer than the top. Because of that hinge joint, it makes it so that it has weaker jaw muscles for opening, but stronger for closing. So it's essentially making the alligator's closing bite much more powerful, but its opening of the jaw muscles are just extremely hard. Like it's hard to do, and it's extremely weak, which is, yeah, why you can tape these guys, their mouths shut. It's their kind of weakness. Although they existed long before tape was a thing, and long before animals that could pin their mouth shut was a thing. But, you know, anyway, so that's the thing here. Kind of a weird outlier in the animal kingdom where, yeah, it's the top jaw that slides up. But anyway, it makes them efficient for like being in the water, and they can just raise it up instead of having to, if they're above the water and their bottom jaw moved, it wouldn't be efficient. So instead they lunge out of the water and grab something. So it's more efficient that way for them. Obviously it works because they've been doing it for millions of years. Next, we have the Nile crocodile. So this is obviously a young one. I mean, so is the alligator. But you can tell it's a young one even if you had no size reference, just due to the fact that its snout is very thin. Adult Nile crocodiles will actually have a much wider snout, and they'll actually look more like alligators, which is kind of interesting. But the adult Nile crocodiles definitely have a much wider snout, and of course a much stronger bite force than this guy would have. Like I was saying with the alligator, you can see here that it is actually just one hole. There is no connection. You can even see a split here. This bone does not go all the way down. It's not meant to. Just a single hole. And if you've looked at fossil crocodilian skulls, they're the same way, just one hole for the nose. So these eyes are smaller proportionately to the size of the skull than the alligator. However, once again, they are on the top of the skull. And then, so essentially, its field of vision is up and forward. Looking at the front view, you know, it has binocular vision. It needs that depth perception to be able to lock onto and grab prey that's drinking from the water. Since this is the Nile crocodile, you know, it lives in Africa. These things will take out anything they can grab that's drinking from the water. So adults can take giraffes, zebras, Cape buffalo, wildebeest, stuff like that. Occasionally they'll be able to get a lion or something, but usually lions have faster reflexes. But anyway, they just are powerful apex predators. Essentially the only thing that takes them out are elephants and hippos. Kind of funny to see them attack an elephant because they'll bite the trunk of the elephant and the elephant just flings them around and ragdolls them. Obviously the largest Nile crocodiles can take out hippos, but most hippos will easily kill crocodiles. So once again, we have our backwards curving bottom jaw, which is longer than the top jaw. And yeah, that's just one of the main interesting features of the crocodilians. Bottom jaw is larger and has the inverse jaw muscles, which is kind of interesting. The thing you'll note, which I'm sure you've heard, the alligator has a U-shaped snout and the crocodile has a V-shaped snout. So essentially the alligator has wider jaws, but then again, an adult Nile crocodile would have slightly more U-shaped, but an adult American alligator would have, like, proportionately sized, would have much wider jaws in general just because it's much larger. But when we compare, you know, these two, it's like, well, this one's a smaller skull, but if you made them the same length, just due to that, it would have a much, much wider snout than this guy. Whereas they're kind of like the back of the skull here is wider than the whole American alligator skull from the sides. Anyway, these teeth, long, conical, these are the true kind of conical crocodilian teeth. So you'll also notice the ones in the back aren't quite as peg-shaped. They're mostly longer. It can still use these back teeth to crunch bones and stuff. However, the ones here are much longer, much pointier, much sharper. So it's kind of interesting. Just essentially looking at this, you can see these teeth are growing in, but they kind of interlock perfectly. Then there'd be a little bit of lip covering this, because with the crocodile you see this tooth and this tooth, and some of the others when the mouth is closed. Whereas with the alligator, I think it's just the fourth tooth you see or something like that. I don't remember for sure. But anyway, that is another way to tell them apart. But for me, coloration, most crocodiles are more greenish colored, at least the more common ones that you would see, whereas the alligators are generally black, gray, or dark brown. And then also just, shape of the snout. But I also have just learned to recognize the different species of crocodilian, so I don't know. So you'll notice it's kind of flat and I guess triangular shaped, from this angle. But yeah, now we can take a look at the biting. Oh, also you will notice this jaw is actually misaligned. This jaw, the top jaw, is not quite as like big as the bottom jaw, like going width-wise. So I think they gave me the wrong bottom jaw. I mean, I don't know, because like I say, the teeth match up fine. It can close his mouth. It's just, if this is the correct jaw, it was a deformed crocodile. Because like this is like, it's hard to tell on camera, but this is actually shifted way too far over. So it would have had weaker jaw muscles than it should have. Okay. So then this, which these teeth really lock well, lifts up. And you can see there, it would have, I might need to position this up higher. There we go. Okay. Opens its mouth pretty wide. There it is. And there is our open mouth. Then essentially a slam shut with extreme power. And some of the, I think it's the second strongest bite force of any living animal after the saltwater crocodile, if I remember correctly. So essentially very powerful bite, and these would do some massive damage to any prey animal it's biting down on. But yeah, first of all, you have the teeth making puncture wounds, and then you have the bone crushing bite force, and then you have the fact that it would shake its head side to side or do a death roll and just completely rip that prey animal apart. And I mean, like I say, this is a 10-inch skull, so you can imagine a adult that is significantly larger. I mean, their skulls will get over 3 feet long. So, a individual that is, I don't know, like 20 feet or so, maybe a little bit bigger, they certainly get massive. So definitely would not want to be attacked by one of these. Even one this size, my arm could fit in there easily. It could break the bone. So that would not be good. Looking at the underside, you can see here, this is interesting. It has this little hole. I don't think the alligator does have that. Anyway, we have this little hole here. I'm not entirely sure what that is for. We have the foramen magnum in the back here. Once again, the brain would be in there, and it's essentially this tiny little bone in there. I mean, not bone, tiny little piece in there would be the brain, so it's essentially super tiny. The brain is, once again, like minuscule and very not large, I don't know, just tiny. So that's just a key feature with reptiles, like I've been saying, small brains. So yes, there's our Nile crocodile. Now we can see, comparing them, once again, the snouts, This one is more V-shaped, this one is more U-shaped. And of course, like I mentioned before, if this skull was the same size, its snout would be much wider. So it's more of an obvious difference if this was a larger skull or if this one was smaller. But since we are looking at these two individuals, it's more even, but you can still see this one's a lot wider. And I guess the whole shape of the skull is more uniform. It's more like similar width all the way down until the snout, whereas this one is a sharp triangle point, both in like pointing towards the length, and just the top of the skull is also like an acute triangle here. But yeah. So that is the skulls of these guys. Next, we will move on to the birds, since birds are reptiles. Now, before I start with the birds, it's important to mention that essentially all birds native to North America, it is illegal to own their skulls. But anything introduced, so like house sparrows, starlings, anything that could be a pet, like zebra finches, stuff like that, anything from other countries, essentially, as long as it's not endangered, or sites, is typically allowed as like something you can own. So unfortunately, people in the US can't really own a lot of bird skulls, even if they find them, just because there's usually no way to prove that you found them. But you can get permits and stuff so that you can own some of them, like duck skulls, or if you're a falconer, you can own skulls from birds of prey, stuff like that. But anyway, we'll start off with our house sparrow. So this is a little guy. So kind of a typical songbird skull. This one, since it's a sparrow, has a more thin beak. You know, finches have a much thicker beak since they're crushing open bigger seeds. These guys are eating smaller seeds. You'll notice that it, along with other birds, have very large eyes proportionate to their skull. And then they have a large brain case. Now you can tell how this guy died. If I can, here, you can tell how this guy died. There's a big dent in the skull. So somehow it had some blunt force trauma to the head. So whether it hit something or something pecked it in the skull, I don't know. Either way, fatal injury due to, crushed skull. So no clue how that happened. And the interesting thing is that it didn't like crack open the skull or penetrate all the way through. It's just dented. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah. Anyway, front view, you can see the big nostrils there. And then the eyes, once again, you can see from the front view. If you look at birds from the front view, like living birds, they're kind of funny looking. So it's kind of interesting. But anyway, typical songbird skull. From the underside, you can see the complex bones making up the underside of the skull. The interesting thing is that birds, so they have hollow bones, but hollow bones are actually stronger than non-hollow bones. And that's just due to the way they're made up with the little supports on the inside that essentially make them hollow, with those supports in there. So they end up being stronger than normal bones of like mammals and stuff. So typical bones you'd see in mammals or reptiles and stuff, that are solid. I mean, technically they're not totally solid because there's marrow in there, but anyway, so those ones are actually weaker than bird bones. However, birds are a lot smaller, so they, I guess, still can take damage pretty easily. But if you made a bird the size of like an elephant, then that thing's going to be pretty stable and essentially really hard to break the bones open. I mean, even think about ostriches, because I mean, they're very massive. And I mean, even their eggs, which obviously has nothing to do with bones, but their eggs are so hard to crack open. Like I think it's like 270 pounds can stand on it. So if a pretty heavy person can stand on it without breaking the egg, which is just crazy. Yeah, little house sparrow. We'll move on to our next one. This is a Chukar partridge. Big eyes, just like with the house sparrow, and along with almost all other birds that have big eyes. And you can see very large nasal cavity here. You'll also notice that it's kind of more on the side of the skull, whereas the house sparrow has it more on top of the skull. So different way of, like, different positioning of their nostrils. And then we have the small little foramen magnum on the back. I guess I should show that with the sparrow too. So there we go, a little foramen magnum in there. And so the interesting thing is that with birds, so I mean mammals, they can have, like, mammals always have 7 vertebrae. Birds can have a varying number, so it really depends on the species. So it just kind of goes out here, you know, they could have like 20, they could have less than that. So it just kind of varies. Pretty interesting for birds. But yeah. And so most birds do not have a good sense of smell at all. Some do, like vultures and albatrosses. A lot of seabirds do. But anyway, house sparrows, for instance, don't really need a sense of smell, so their smell probably isn't too good at all. It is definitely a myth that if you like mess with the babies, you know, if you pick up a baby and put it back in the nest, it's a myth that the parents will abandon it. That's just not true. That's a myth for all animals, as far as I'm aware, because rabbits, that's also a myth. Even deer, that's a myth. If you mess with a baby deer, mess with a baby rabbit, the mother is not going to abandon it. That's not how nature works. So do not believe that. That is not true. Big brain case. So, I mean, the funny thing is, compared to, you know, other reptiles, the more scaly ones, instead of the feathery ones. So, you know, birds have big brain cases. They have big brains, compared to like an alligator or a lizard or a snake that have puny little brains. So this type of reptile, birds, have very large brains. You can see kind of the ear in here. But once again, made up of all sorts of tiny little bones that fuse to create the entire skull. Even just like looking at the beak. This one has the keratin sheath still preserved, and the lower jaw. You can see this super thin little thing here is the lower jaw. And then the keratin sheath over the beak. So these guys obviously quite a bit bigger than the house sparrow. They can be found in North America, however they were introduced. We actually had one nearby my home at one point. That was kind of interesting. I never saw it, but people posted it on Facebook, so it's kind of cool to see it on there. But anyway, partridge, kind of downward pointing beak instead of going straight out, curves slightly down. But yeah. Next, we go to an even larger skull. This one is not perfect condition. This was a discounted skull because it was just damaged a little bit, but here it is, the turkey. So first of all, you'll notice the beak is kind of split, so it's just a deformed turkey also. Their beak would normally be together, but this one just is a little bit deformed. Nostrils are here. You'll notice they are on top and visible from the sides. So very large nose cavity here. Extremely large compared to the other two, especially compared to the house sparrow. Still has very large eyes. This is a much bigger skull, probably around 4.5 inches, so a lot bigger. This one actually has a bit of a sagittal crest here, which is interesting, kind of fans out. Ears over here, kind of like a hump head, you know, kind of like goes up at the end, which is kind of interesting how it does that. But still pretty similar in shape to the partridge, other than the beak is a lot wider. It is more of an exact point. Instead of like getting thinner around here, it stays relatively the same thickness all the way around. This one, we can take a look at the bottom jaw, since it is separate. And so Here we have it. It's essentially like if we look at this part here, the very front, it is kind of like a scoop almost. This is actually a much wider bottom jaw, like it's thicker than the Chukar. Then obviously the back, which is where it goes onto the skull and then can open and close. Once again, this is deformed, so its beak doesn't fit on very well and doesn't close properly. But you know, turkeys are big animals, you know, about the size of a real life velociraptor. So kind of interesting. But I mean, the male turkeys, you know, the toms, they get absolutely massive. They're kind of big and bulky. I mean, a lot of it is their feathers. But no, I'm sure you've seen some pretty big Thanksgiving turkeys. And yeah, I mean, turkeys get huge. But anyway, this is a smaller one, probably a female. But yeah, it's sadly deformed. But you can notice some of these little holes along here, little pits. I'm not entirely sure what that's for, but it does have little pits in there. So that's kind of interesting. Then these little like brow bones going over the eyes. But yeah. Then moving on to our birds of prey. All the rest of these, well, I say all the rest, but I only have two more. All the rest of these are replicas, and these are birds of prey. So our first one here, this is a snowy owl. So this is a skull a little over 3 inches long, probably closer to 4. But the first thing you'll notice is how massive the eyes are. Humongous eyes. Of course, all birds also have ossicles, which are the little bones that go inside of the eye. You know, with owls, they have these really long ones. They have really, really good vision, and night vision. But you'll notice the hooked beak, and this one actually, you can see here, this little piece right here is part of the keratin sheath. So it looks kind of weird because the mouth doesn't close and it's a little bit broken here. But if this bird was alive, the keratin sheath would go here and go even farther down and then cover all of this. That way there's no gap in between the beak, and it makes this a little bit more farther down. So it essentially connect these two together. Bottom and top jaw would be shut all the way, and that's how that works. Nose on the side, you know, I mean, you can still see it from the top, but not quite as distinct. Nostrils, yeah, on the side, you can see all the way through there. Anyway, once again, huge eyes. Their eyes kind of face forward and have these big, ossicles that essentially stick all the way out to here. And the interesting thing about them is that they can't like move their eyes to look around. If they want to look at something, they have to move their head. The other interesting thing about owls is that they sit with their face down. So like the actual owl would be like standing upright and its face would be like this, whereas other birds would hold their head like this, you know, especially like a hawk, its head to be straight out, but owls hold their heads down. So if you've ever looked at like a I don't know, like a naked baby barn owl, you would see that they hold their head downward, and it's kind of weird. Or even just looking at like skeletons of them, but you'll notice that, yeah, their beaks are always pointed down like this instead of being out like that, like other birds of prey and other birds. But yeah, there's like, I think there was a featherless owl that was completely naked, and you could just see its head, and it was really funny, and I feel bad for it, little naked owl, but it was kind of cute and weird looking. But yeah, anyway, foramen magnum here, back of the skull. You'll notice here that it has these little things that curve out to the side right here. Just curves out and curves out right here. So these are essentially where the ears are. So, you know, we looked at like the Chukar, whose ears are just this little hole. Owls are different. They have these little like guiders here that guide sound into their ears. So its ear is actually like in here, and when it's hearing a noise, it kind of funnels it into the ear. They're facing different directions, so this one kind of goes out like that. The other one goes up a bit, so they can essentially pinpoint the exact direction that a sound is coming from. and that allows them to better detect their prey from hearing. And then once they spot it, they will dive down and fly silently thanks to feather adaptations, little fringes on their feathers that make their flight silent. And then they will be able to go snatch their prey. And of course, with owls, everything they swallow, they have to swallow it whole, and they vomit up owl pellets because they can't digest fur or bones or anything like that. Top of the skull, very big brain case. You can see how massive this is. So a very big brain would fit in there. The beak is kind of wide. You can also see that it kind of goes to a straight point, kind of like even instead of getting like dipping in. It is kind of a even taper. And kind of this big forehead here, you know, it like slopes up. But yeah, then the bottom jaw, so that opens here, and so, you know, bite like that, and they would rip and tear with their beak, pun not intended, or reference not intended. And so little hinges here and here, hinges here and here. So these go on to these, and then that's its biting action. I have no clue how wide they can actually open their jaw in real life, but I'm assuming it's at least this wide, pretty wide. I don't know. But anyway, snowy owl. So one of the largest owls. Also, of course, the great gray owl is the largest owl in the world, but snowy owls are still up there. So yeah, very large owl feeding on lemmings and things like that. So rodents and lagomorphs, which are rabbits. So yeah. Anyway, once again, front-facing eyes. So yeah, that's our snowy owl. Then next, we have our second owl and the last bird in this segment, the laughing owl, which the laughing owl is a species that went extinct in the 1900s. So the laughing owl was named after its laughing call. It was like, it's described as a maniacal laugh, but it was before recordings and anything was available. So essentially nobody alive today has heard it. And there's no way of like getting audio of it since they're extinct. But it's kind of interesting because it's described to be like, there's like all sorts of different ways people have described it, but it's always kind of like a maniacal laughter that's kind of evil and creepy. There's one, I think it was in the 60s, was the last time one was ever heard, but they were extinct decades before that, or at least declared extinct decades before that, but someone heard one flying overhead that made a maniacal laugh, and so they didn't see the bird, but they're like, oh, that must have been a laughing owl. Anyway, you'll notice here that it has this kind of knob on the beak. Once again, like with the snowy owl, like I mentioned, this one, you can see, if I can get this held here properly, you can see the beak does not close. There's this gap. So like I was saying with the snowy owl, keratin sheath would cover this and this, and then they would fit together. There wouldn't be a gap there anymore. So yeah. Well, maybe that's what happened with the turkey also. I don't know. Either way, it's still deformed slightly. It was a discounted skull because it was deformed. But maybe with a sheath it would fit a lot better. Anyway, so this one, you can tell how it died. It had some brain trauma here. Once again, it probably had something hit it in the head or crashed into something. I don't know. Either way, it took a massive hit to the skull, and because of that, has a chunk missing here. And just like with snowy owl, massive, massive eyes take up almost all of the skull, not counting the beak. Forward facing, once again, it would have the ossicles pointing forward. The nostrils are a lot smaller here and here, and definitely on the sides, not really on the top. Brain case is fairly large, just like with the snowy owl. And of course, other birds also have very large brain cases, like I said, but particularly birds of prey, which are extremely smart. And of course, so are corvids like crows and ravens and jays. But anyway, once again, just like with the snowy owl, you'll notice this kind of like forehead, like kind of hump here, and then this little, like it's like almost a right angle right here. And again, the head would be pointed down like this, or maybe a little bit more, I don't know. They're kind of interesting. They also have like a mask, kind of like a raccoon. If you look up drawings of them, there's like 1 or 2 photos ever taken of them, obviously black and white, and they're kind of cool photos. And then once again, we have the hinges here, so this fits in here and here, and then closes the jaw like that, and then it fits in perfectly. So yeah, that's our laughing owl. And if we compare this to the snowy owl, you can see it is a lot smaller. So smaller animal, but still very similar. You know, the shape of the head is similar. However, you'll notice that the laughing owl has a bigger brain case proportionately. Also, yeah, the snowy owl has larger eyes, and that's probably why this guy has a bigger brain case. The laughing owl has a bigger brain case because more of the skull of the snowy owl is taken up by eyes. So that's a difference there. But still pretty similar. Next, we will take a look at an ossicle of a bird. That way you can see what those look like. Okay, so this is the ossicle of an ostrich. So very large eyes. Of course, ostriches are the largest living bird, so they have a very large skull. However, you know, compared to other birds, their skull is very small compared to their body size. Because imagine if an ostrich looked just like a sparrow, but the same size as it is in terms of like weight and length and all that. Like, that'd be crazy. Just imagine a sparrow that large. Anyway, so this is the eye ring, the sclerotic ring, the ossicle. So it is just essentially inside of the eye, and you'll see it's like kind of made up of, there we go, individual bones that kind of wrap around into this. Interestingly, let me see the snowy owl, and then zoom back out. I think this might actually, yeah, so that's what it would look like. Essentially, it would be right here in the skull. However, the snowy owl's is going farther in, but essentially it just goes over the eye here, and that's what its ossicle would look like in the skull. It wouldn't be sticking out that far here, and it would be like close to the skull, but like anyway, that's what it looks like here. Although owls do have ones that stick out, but they're not as fat at the outside. But yeah, essentially that's what it would look like. But yeah, so ostrich ossicle, so just bone that's in the eye. And like I was showing you with the lizards, the crested gecko and the prairie lizard both had an eye ring, an ossicle, sclerotic ring, whatever you want to call it. So birds have them, fish have them, reptiles have them, so all sorts of creatures have them. Kind of cool. But yeah, it's just bone inside of the eyeball. Yeah, pretty cool. And so that is it for our birds, and now we'll move on to the amphibians. Okay, so we have 5 amphibian skulls, all of which are frogs and toads. So we will start off with a tiny little guy, so we'll put this on ×2 zoom, and it's going to be hard to hold. Okay, here it is. This is Blanchard's cricket frog. So cricket frogs are tiny little guys. Biggest one I've ever seen was 1.5 inches, which is kind of crazy because usually they're 1 inch or smaller. So tiny little frogs. They're brownish or green. Sometimes have a little bit of red on them. But anyway, you can see large eyes, one on each side. The nostrils are really hard to see, but they're there in the front. And I don't think this one has a bottom jaw. No, it doesn't. Anyways, a tiny little skull. I'm assuming they're called cricket frogs because both they're tiny and because they make little chirps. But anyway, very tiny frog, found near wetlands and stuff like that, ponds. Although, you know, most frogs are found near water. So anyway, tiny little guy, very flat skull. So, you know, the tiny little thing just fits on the tip of my thumb, like 0.5 centimeter long. But anyway, Yeah, tiny little frog skull. Next, this one's not going to have much to say about it either, just simply due to the similarity between it and the cricket frog. However, this one does have a bottom jaw. So this one here, you can see it does have part of the bottom jaw. It's hard to see, but it's super thin there. This is Boreal chorus frog. Has some of the spine there. So a little bit of vertebrae. Once again, very similar skull to the last one. You can see the little eardrums here on the side, kind of the top there on the side. Big eyes, nose in the very front, still has a bit of skin on the top. But yeah, that's our Boreal chorus frog. They're kind of spotted in life. They have some like dark spots and stuff. They're kind of interesting. Then we'll move on to a toad. This is the Great Plains toad. You can kind of still see the patterning on there, some skin still on there, and that's the literal patterning that if you Google them, that's like in all the photos, these little spots right here on the face. Trying to rotate that, but it didn't work efficiently and effectively. This side, you can also see those little spots. Anyway, so here you'll notice it has the vertebrae and the part of the pelvis. So the interesting thing about frogs and toads is that they do not have ribs. So these things sticking out are not ribs. Those are part of the vertebrae. On a different type of animal like a mammal, the ribs would curve downward from there. But frogs and toads do not have ribs. So then, like I say, here's the part of the pelvis. The other part would kind of curve around here. And then the legs would attach on. But looking at this, we have big eyes, and then the nose in the very front here. So yeah, there's the nose up there. Eye. This one does not really have the eardrums preserved. Or actually, I don't know if... No, because toads have the weird poison glands or whatever, at least in the Bufo genus. Anyway, so very triangular skull, a little bit rounded in the front, wide. I mean, you know, toads and frogs will fit anything in their mouths that they can fit in their mouths. You know, they'll try to eat anything that they can. So, you know, like African bullfrogs will swallow, I mean, essentially anything that fits in their mouths. You know, Pac-Man frogs trying to eat other Pac-Man frogs. African bullfrogs eating rats, scorpions, tarantulas. You know, I'm sure you've seen those YouTube videos. They'll eat everything. So kind of crazy. Kind of flattened skull. You can see the bottom jaw there. Really thin. With all these guys, they have a really thin bottom jaw. Looking at the underside of the skull. You can see that jaw again, kind of curving around here. Then the underside where you can see the eyes. So pretty interesting. And then you can kind of see through to the nostrils there. But yeah. And okay. Then we will move on to our next amphibian, which is the plains leopard frog. So you can see on this guy, it kind of has these spikes on the front by the nostrils that stick straight up. So that's kind of interesting. Again, it has very large eyes, very kind of large hole there for the where the nose is. But yeah, very large eyes. This one does not have the bottom jaw. It's hard to tell because they're very small and thin, so I had to double check. You can see here, let me see if I can zoom in more. There are tiny little teeth. Let's see if I can get this. Tiny little teeth running along the edges of the jaw. Very hard to see with this zoom because I don't have the best zoom. but essentially tiny little teeth running along here. You know, they say amphibians like frogs and stuff don't have teeth. That is not true. There are some that don't have teeth, but a lot of them do have tiny little teeth. Kind of interesting. Yeah, very, once again, flat skull, wide, and they'll kind of funnel down anything they can into their mouths. Opportunistic predators. So kind of interesting. Leopard frogs get fairly big. I think they're the second largest North American frog, or at least U.S. frog, after the American bullfrog, if I remember correctly. I might not be remembering that right, but I've seen some 8-inch leopard frogs. Kind of crazy how big they are. Probably the legs were longer than that, maybe 10 inches. I don't know, like 10 inches total, counting the back leg stretched out. Anyway, they can get pretty large. So they're kind of cool. They'll be like brown with some black spots, or sometimes they'll be more tan with brown and black. Sometimes they have some green, so they're pretty cool. And there's other kinds of leopard frogs too, besides the plains leopard frog. But anyway, pretty cool. Then for our last amphibian, this is the only amphibian skull that I ever bought. The others, I found them all. But anyway, this is the American bullfrog. So this is, I think it was 1.7 inches long and 1.5 wide, or something like that. And so this one has the bottom jaw. It's a little bit open, so you can see that. You can see on this one easier that it does have teeth. This one's a lot easier to see the little teeth on there. So yeah, that's a lot easier to see the teeth. Nostrils in the front, big giant eyes. This one is missing the eardrum piece. They were supposed to give me one with this, but they're like, oh, it may vary in condition. Like, yeah, but this is allegedly a condition, but it's missing like half of the stuff back here, so on both sides, so that sucks. And they gave me a very small one, considering the average size was supposed to be 2 inches, but whatever. Anyway, so pretty cool. American bullfrogs will eat everything that fits their mouths, you know, fish, and bugs, and all sorts of other things. Bullfrogs get pretty massive. I've seen American bullfrogs with a leg span over a foot long. So they get pretty massive. They're kind of like greenish and brownish, kind of cool patterns sometimes. Sometimes some darker patterns. They're very cool. Hoppity guys. So there you can see the wide skull. So it would be fitting in large prey items. So it could open that mouth pretty wide and swallow something that would fit in there. So pretty cool. Skull is actually taller than that of the other frogs we've looked at proportionately. So it's a lot taller of a skull, which is interesting. More rounded of a head. Still kind of triangular shaped, but it definitely is very rounded snout. So kind of interesting. You can see the foramen magnum back there where the vertebrae would attach on. But yeah, that is our bullfrog. Obviously that is the North American bullfrog, because there's Ty, my cat's sad. He has all sorts of mental problems or something. We don't know why. I guess he's old, and suffering from constant pain of existing. So unfortunately he cries all the time as soon as he realizes that I am anywhere that he is not. So anyway, like I was saying, American bullfrog is this guy. African bullfrog gets even larger, and there's a lot of videos of them doing live feedings on YouTube that you can watch. But there's stories of them attacking lions that try to eat them. It's kind of crazy. They're just aggressive. Anyway, American bullfrog. And that is it for the amphibians, and that is it for our reptile, bird, and amphibian section of my collection. And now I'm going to redo the mammals for part 1, since that one was kind of awkward. Since the first part was recorded with the GoPro, and I couldn't really see what I was recording, so stuff was off camera part of the time. And then the second half was recorded with an old phone, since mine broke, and the old phone didn't sync the video and audio properly, so I was talking about things before they actually happened. So we're going to redo the mammal part and get that out hopefully soon. But yeah, it's going to be pretty long. The other one was like 2 hours 26 minutes, but I have a lot more mammals since then, so it's going to probably be 3 hours unless something weird happens. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.